Welcome back to Live from Paris. Let's now get a business update with Owen Fairclough. Hello again. Owen, we're going to start with the markets, and London's leading Europe down in the wake of a dramatic end last week.
Yeah, it all looked a bit different, Claire, on Friday afternoon on the European markets. A lot of investors have had the weekend to start thinking about particularly what this is all going to cost the City of London, this new, dare I say, isolationist approach of the UK. The FTSE not bearing the brunt of the losses this morning, but still nevertheless opening around 0.5% down, and the rest of the European markets feeling the pessimism just a little bit more, all down around 1%. Big day in Italy. When is it not a big day in Italy right now? The Italian government selling off more 3- and 12-month bonds today, around €9 billion worth. So we've seen the bond yield, you can see there. It has dropped back a little bit in the last couple of weeks, of course, with mixed feelings about whether Italy can indeed be saved by these various Eurozone plans. But nevertheless, bond yields, that's the amount of interest the government's charged for investors charge the government for holding debt, around 6.5%, so still far too high to be sustainable. The Asian markets, I can tell you that the Hang Seng is probably feeling a little bit of that pessimism from Europe. It reversed, spent most of the day making some decent gains, but has in fact gone into the red slightly, down by around 0.2%. The Nikkei did manage to hang on to those gains and close the day around 1.5% up. Well, we're going to stay with this, of course, the whole fallout from that dramatic decision by David Cameron not to get a little bit closer to Europe at that summit last week. Charlie Parker is the investments editor at Citywire in London. We can join him now. Charlie, good morning to you. We've talked a lot this morning on the show already about the financial impact of David Cameron's decision. Certainly the financial impact on the City of London. We've talked about transaction taxes, harmonising trade settlements in euros. How much of an impact do you think this is all going to have on the City of London?
Well, in the short term, it's all cost for the City of London. It's losing some business to Europe, in particular Frankfurt. But I think it's worth pointing out that's relatively low-margin business. It's not the most profitable business the City does. What really will matter is whether in the long term Britain's isolation costs us our position in much more prized bits of the City. Things like fund management, which have grown very rapidly in recent years by having one regime across Europe. Now, it remains to be seen whether Britain's isolation will damage our position there, but it's certainly added to the business uncertainty that people feel around that.
Charlie, Claire Pride here in the studio with Owen. Good morning. Now, if the UK and the City do become financially isolated, can London reposition itself?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that there is a reason that London is a big global financial centre, and it's not because of the size of the UK economy. It's because the city is already very well positioned globally, and not actually particularly in Europe, but in Asia and in emerging markets as a result, of course, of Britain's historical trade links of the British Empire. That's what's given the City of London its historic strengths in mining and oil and banking and all these things. That's intact. So I think the city will remain as a big financial centre, and its position in Europe does not really jeopardise that. What it does do is weaken its potential to grow in Europe. But, when you talk to people in the city at the moment, we should point out their biggest thing on their agenda is keep us out of the Eurozone crisis, keep us out of the debt crisis, and please, we don't want a transaction tax. Now, it looks like those things have been avoided, so most of the cost of this failed treaty, effectively, is something that I think the city will be willing to bear in order to get that.
Charlie, just briefly, if you can, I know it's complicated stuff, but where do you see now these Euro leaders going with this whole question of who backstops Europe? We've got some very mixed messages over the weekend from Germany on this.
Well, I think the short answer is the only people who can backstop it in the short term is the European Central Bank. Are they slightly more minded to do that on a bigger scale as a result of this treaty? Maybe slightly more, but probably not enough. I think there's still going to be another crisis that we're going to be pushed to before the European Central Bank really steps in the way it ultimately has to.
Good to talk to you, Charlie. Many thanks indeed. That was Charlie Parker at Citywire in London.
Bit of company news for us now?
Yes, let's pick up on a few more of those. The UK's financial watchdog says its own flawed supervisory approach contributed to the near collapse of Royal Bank of Scotland. The Financial Services Authority published a report into RBS, one of the UK banks that had to be part nationalised to avoid bankruptcy in 2008. As well as criticising itself, the FSA says RBS also undermined its own position through risky short-term funding and the misjudged buyout of ABN AMRO's investment arm.
And Arriva has asked for its shares to be suspended ahead of an unveiling of new strategy later this week. The nuclear giant will also report large losses estimated at more than €1 billion. The French state-owned nuclear company is reportedly to cut nearly 3,000 jobs and write off more than €1 billion. Its share price has nearly halved this year amid huge budget and timetable overruns on its new generation reactor in Finland. Now, the US debt crisis is eating into budgets everywhere, and defence is no exception. The military needs to save $450 billion while trying to stay ahead of the pack with the most advanced technology. So one solution is for defence systems to hitch a ride into space on the back of someone else's rocket. And France's Arianespace is taking the lead, as Philip Crowther reports.
This is a rare chance to pass this door. It leads to the clean room, the centerpiece of the factory. Here, Orbital builds its satellites. To save money, the US military has asked this company to attach a missile warning system to a commercial satellite, the SES-2, seen here on the right. This is what the industry calls a hosted payload.
A hosted payload is a new business model. As pretty much everybody realizes, government budgets are under pressure. Industry and government together are looking for new business models on how they can carry out their mission in a more cost-effective way. Exactly what it does, what it's going to be used for, some of those details we're not able to talk about.
Infrared space surveillance is the official name. In this case, it means detecting and tracking a missile's heat. Sending something like that into space is expensive, and the US Air Force needs to cut costs.
Allumage Vulcain.
Here's where the Europeans come into play. Arianespace launched the satellite from French Guyana.
Décollage.
It was a real first, so we had a large delegation of US military members at the Space Center in Guyana. Launching a hosted payload costs about 15% of launching an entirely separate satellite, so you can see why the US Department of Defense is doing things this way.
The launch itself had to be delayed because of a strike. Still, the US military appears happy with this new European partner. In these times of a US debt crisis, the Department of Defense is looking at some potentially very serious budget cuts, and companies like this one might be able to take advantage, offering a commercial way of helping the US military send their satellites into space.
And that's it for business. Thanks very much, Owen. That's it from me. Do stay tuned for all the latest headlines with Stuart Norval. Don't go away.